Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Nun Dalid. The Mishnah mentioned the case of someone who commits incest with his mother. And if his mother is also married to his father, then, according to Chachamim, that person will be liable to two counts. Number one, incest with his mother, and number two, his father's wife. If he's killed because of it, if he does it b'mezid, well, you can only get killed once, so it won't matter. But if he does it b'shogeg, let's say not knowing who she was, thinking she was somebody else, then he has to bring two korban hatats. However, Rabbi Yehuda disagreed and said, in such a case, one is only liable to one. There's not a double punishment for this. And the question we dealt with yesterday is, what is Rabbi Yehuda's source? We saw three different opinions, and we landed on Rava, and now we're going to bring a baraita that supports Rava. Rava said that Advat Avicha, that is referring to a father's wife, as opposed to another opinion that says Advat Abicha is talking about incest with the father himself. And so he says, no, that's not true. It's the father's wife, and that pasuk is going to cover two out of the three cases, a father's wife who is his mother and a father's wife who is not his mother. And then we have another pasuk of incest with a mother, but from that pasuk we see that if one does commit incest with his mother, then imechahi, those extra words come to teach that one is liable only to one. So even if there are other prohibitions involved, if it's his mother, then only this one applies and the other ones don't apply. So that is how Rava explained the source for Rabbi Yehuda. And now we teach Tanya kevate de Rava ish perat lekatan. So now we're going to bring a braita that supports Rava. This is a long baraita. It's actually going to elaborate much more than the short couple of lines that Rava himself said. A quick intro. This comes from the Sifra. Stam Sifra is Rabbi Yehuda. So this is going to represent the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Second point of introduction. Whenever we derive capital punishment or other punishments also from the Torah, we actually need two sources. One for an azhara, one as a warning, and one to actually give the punishment itself. And so we're always going to look for two different sources for that. It happens to be in the case of incest in Vayikra 18. It gives a list of all the prohibitions. And then in Vayikra 20, it actually gives a list of the prohibitions again, but this time it also adds the punishments. So it's actually very nice. Where you have Vayikra 18 is the warnings, Vayikra chapter 20 are the punishments. Okay, so we're going to deal with this pasuk. That's what the Sifra is interpreting. And it says, Isha sherishka bet eshet aviv, ervat aviv gila, motu metu shenehem demehem bam. So let's go phrase by phrase. The word ish, but that's what we're interpreting now. If he sleeps with his father's wife, then that is the nakedness of his father that he has revealed, and they will both die. And demehem bam, from that we're going to learn sikila. So let's go back to the midrash. So the word ish, that comes to exclude a minor. If a minor commits such a sin, the minor is not punished because he's a minor, not responsible for his actions, only if he is an adult. Asher ishka bet eshet aviv, mashma ben eshet aviv shehimo, uben eshet aviv shelo imo. Since it says father's wife, that means father's wife who is also his mother, or father's wife who is not his mother. Could be his biological mother, or it could be his stepmother. The first case would be like a normal family, father, mother, child, and this child sleeps with his mother, or it could be a stepmother. Both of those are included in father's wife. Imo shena eshet aviv minayin. But what about a case where someone commits incest with his mother, who is not and was not married to his father? He's born out of wedlock. What about a case like that? How would we know what's the punishment for that? This pasuk is not going to tell us because it's only father's wife. Talmud Lomad Evat Aviv Gila Mufne Lakish Veladun Menu Gezerah Shava. So therefore, the continuation of the pasuk that says he has revealed his father's nakedness, that is an opening to make a gezerah shavah. This is one half of a gezerah shavah. It's extra words, so it's free to make a gezerah shavah. We're not going to bring the gezerah shavah right now. We're going to bring it in a couple of lines from now. So just remember that we're leaving this hanging, and we're going to continue it in a second. But first, we're going to continue the rest of the pasuk. Mot yumetu beskila. Atamer beskila o eno ela be'achad mikol mitot hamurot b'Torah. When it says they shall die, that means stoning. How do you know it means stoning? Maybe it means a different type of capital punishment. Ne'mar kan demehem bam, ne'mar be'ovi de'oni demehem bam, alelan beskila, afkan beskila. We learn from a gezerah shavah. Here it says their blood is upon them, and regarding a necromancer and sorcerer also says the same words, and therefore in Oven De'oni it says explicitly that they get sekila. So we learn that whenever it says demehem bam, that is beskila, as we mentioned yesterday. Onesh shamanu azhara minayin. This pasuk in Vayikra 20 is very good to teach us the punishment, but we need another pasuk to tell us a warning, because you can't give a punishment unless you give a warning. That's true when it's live, when the crime is happening, the witnesses have to give a warning, and only then the punishment. And it's true within the legislation of the Torah as well, that we need the Torah to give us a warning and also a punishment. So where do we know the warning? Talmud Omar, ervat avicha lo tegale. Ervat avicha zo eshet avicha. This is in fact from Vayikra 18. Ervat avicha ervat avicha lo tegale. So nakedness of father and nakedness of mother do not reveal. Imechahi, those were the extra words we're going to see. Lo tegale ervata, do not reveal her nakedness. So that's where we learn it from. Ervat avicha. Ervat avicha means the wife's, the father's wife. Okay, so nakedness of a father is not actually directly sinning with the father, but rather with the father's wife. But now we question that assumption. Ata omer eshet avicha o eno ela ervat avicha mamash. How do you know that the word ervat avicha means father's wife? Maybe it means a son sinning with his father. Ne'emad kan ervat avicha lo tegalev. Ne'emad lalan ervat aviv gila. Malalan bishut hakatu medaber. Afkan bishut hakatu medaber. And now comes the gezerah shavah that we left hanging before. It says here, ervat avicha, do not reveal. And it says in chapter 20, ervat aviv gila. Those are the extra words that we said before. And just like over there, it's clear, it's talking about within a marriage, because there it says father's wife. So to here is talking about violating within a marriage, meaning that the son is not with the father, but rather with the father's wife. And so that's where we see the warning as well as the punishment. Umashma ben eshet aviv shehimo, uben eshet aviv she'ena imo. Now, back to the question that we had before, that pasuk, we know that a father's wife is prohibited, whether it's his mother or not his mother. Imo she'ena eshet aviv minayin, tamad omar evat imecha lo tegale. But the question that we had before, what about if it's his mother, who was not married to his father, was never married to his father? Oh, now we have this pasuk here that in Vayikra 18 that says, ervat imecha, nakedness of your mother. That's clear. That's a prohibition against being with one's mother. Do not reveal. And the ela ba'azhara, but chapter 18 is only a warning. Shasaka tu bimo, she'ena eshet aviv ke'imo shehi eshet aviv, onesh minayin. So I only have a warning that the pasuk says a mother who is not married to his father is the same as also prohibited, like a mother who is married to his father. So yes, I know that there's a warning, but what about a punishment? I need to connect it to chapter 20 in some way. Ne'emar kan ervat avicha lo tegalev, ne'emar lalan ervat aviv gila, ma be'azhara asa katuv imo she'ena eshet aviv, ke'imo shehi eshet aviv, af be'onesh asa katuv imo she'ena eshet aviv, ke'imo shehi eshet aviv. So now the same gezerah shavah that from that hanging words that we saw at the beginning of the Baraita, now will come up again and teach something in the other direction that says here Advat Aviv, and it says over there Advat Aviv. Just like in chapter 18, when it comes to a warning, the pasuk equates a mother who is not married to the father like a mother who is married to a father, and there's a prohibition, a warning there. So too, regarding a punishment, the pasuk is equating them, and that's how we know that there's not only a warning, but also a punishment. Now, if we left it here, we would end up having two punishments for sinning with a mother who was married to the father, because there's now two different Pesukim, and we proved both of them, a prohibition of mother and prohibition of father's wife. And so if we stop here, this would be like Chachamim, that there's two prohibitions. However, this is all Rabbi Yehuda. So now comes in, Imechahi, the extra words, in Vayikra 18, she is your mother, who I know that already. Mishum imo ata mechayevo v'yata mechayevo mishum eshet av. That comes to teach that if it's the case where someone sleeps with his mother who's also married to his father, then there's only one prohibition. Imechahi, only one. He is liable to one count and not for his father's wife. Okay, that is the end of the derivation for the Yehuda, and that is the same as what Rava said, so we supported Rava. V'Rabbanan and Chachamim, who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, and they say if someone sleeps with his mother who's also his father's wife, then there's two counts. How will they interpret all the Pesukim that we just brought as a proof for the Yehuda? And the answer is Edvat Avicha Mamash. They will say when this Pasuk here says Edvat Avicha, this is not a reference to a father's wife, and thereby making a Gezerah Shavah from this to the Pasuk in chapter 20, as the Yehuda said. No, they think that just like Edvat Imecha means incest with a mother, so to Edvat Avicha means incest with the father. And so there's no Gezerah Shavah here to learn what we did before. We ask, Hi, me'ed zachar nafka. Yeah, but this prohibition against incest with the father, we already know from ve'ed zachar, from homosexual relations, which this is. So we already know that that's prohibited. So why do I need edvat abicha? The answer is l'chayav alav shetayim, that would be two counts. If it was done bishogeg, then they would have to bring two korban chatatz. Ve'chid Rab Yehuda, damar Rab Yehuda, nochri haba'al aviv chayav shetayim, haba'al achi aviv chayav shetayim. As Rab Yehuda says, Rab Yehuda is an Amora, not to be confused with Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana, who we've been talking about. This Rab Yehuda is following in accordance with Rabbanan here, and he says that nochri. Now, usually this means a non-Jew. We're about to see they don't mean a non-Jew; they mean a Jew, but we don't want to say a Jew because this is such a horrible act to do. We don't want to attribute it to anybody. So if a person, really means a Jew, who has relations with his father, he is liable to two counts, incest with father and mishkav zachor. And if someone has relations with his father's brother, also two transgressions, because father's brother also, just like an aunt is prohibited, even a father's brother's wife is prohibited, so too, a father's brother is also prohibited. That's as one as incest, and two as mishkav zachor. Amar Rava, mistabara miletad Rav Yehuda b'Yisrael b'shogeg u'bekorban. Rava explaining Rav Yehuda says that his statement makes sense if we're dealing with a Jew, although he said nochri, and we're talking about if he did it b'shogeg. If he did it on purpose, it would be capital punishment. And so therefore, the question is, how many korbanot does he have to bring? So why did he say nochri? He wanted to say better language. He didn't want to attribute to a Jew such a bad crime. Because if you're talking about a non-Jew, what would his punishment be? Even for acting beshogeg, a non-Jew who does incest would get capital punishment, and he can't kill a person twice. And therefore, Rav Yehuda's statement actually would not make sense if you take nochri literally. Therefore, it's a euphemism for a Jew. Tanyana mehachi habal aviv chayav shetayim, habal achi aviv chayav shetayim. There's a braita that supports this law that says someone who has relation with his father is liable to two counts, and so too with his father's brother is also liable to two counts. Now that is the opinion of Rabbanan, because they say Edvat Aviv is referring to father himself. And therefore, that's one count, and Mishkav Zachor is the other count. Now, what about Rabbi Yehuda? Would he disagree? Well, seemingly, since he says Advat Aviv is a reference to father's a wife, so then he would only have one count here, right? So that's one opinion. Some say Rabbi Yehuda would disagree with that and say that incest with the father is only one count of Mishkav Zachor, but not its own prohibition. And some say even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that there are two counts of liability for incest with the father, and one is Mishkav Zachor. The other one, we're going to learn it from a Kal Vachomer. Since there is a pasuk that says one's father's brother is prohibited, so we learn from a Kal Vachomer, Uma achi aviv de korban if a father's brother is prohibited, and that's only because it's a relative of his father. So all the more so, if he sins with his father himself, that would also be prohibited. And so even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that there's double prohibition of incest with the father, even though he's not going to learn it from Ervat Aviv, he'll learn it from a Kal Vachomer. Now, these two opinions, the first Ikad Amre, second Ikad Amre, will depend on a different machloket. The Kamipal Gebe Pluktad Abaye v'Rava, Amor Sabar Onshim Min Hadin, Amor Sabar and Onshim Min Hadin. Abaye and Rava have a machloket. One of them says that we can give capital punishment based on a Kal Vachomer, and that would be this opinion that you're learning Kal Vachomer from a father's brother to a father. Whereas the other opinion says we do not give capital punishment based on a Kal Vachomer. This has to do with how much we trust reason, especially for a Kal Vachomer, where there's lots of ways to argue a Kal Vachomer. This way and that way, you can always usually pick some aspect of something that is more stringent in this way or more stringent in that way. And so, one opinion, the second one, En Onshim Min Hadin, says Kal Vachomer is too subjective. Right? It's easy to find something that may not be actually the key point and say, well, this is bigger, heavier, more stringent in some way, and then you're going to kill someone based on some reason, but that reason might be overturned. As sometimes you can argue the opposite way, and therefore, although we use Kal Vachomer in general for capital punishment, we're going to be more careful. The other opinion says, no, Kal Vachomer, that's one of the ways that we learn the Torah Nidreshet Bahen, and so we learn lots of laws from Kal Vachomer, and for capital punishment also, we can apply it. So these two Ikad Amres will depend on those two opinions. V'Rabanan azhara le'eshet aviv minalehu. Now we turn to Rabbanan Chachamim, and we ask, from where do they derive a warning for the prohibition of a father's wife? And the answer is simple: Nafka lehu me'advat eshet avicha lo tegaleh. It's explicit in Vayikra 18. You cannot reveal your father's wife's nakedness. So that's in Vayikra 18, which is all about the warnings, because it doesn't have the punishments there. So that's the warning according to Chachamim. What's Rabbi Yehuda going to do with this pasuk? Because they already learned the warning and the punishment from a Gezerah Shavah. So this pasuk is extra. Rabbi Yehuda says, this is a warning that one is prohibited to his father's wife even after his father dies. We might have thought that while the father is alive, then you can't be with the father's wife. Maybe after he dies, now she's free, his father's not even around, maybe then one can be with the father's wife. No, this comes to teach even after the father dies. Now the rabbis agree with this law. Where are they going to learn it from? The rabbis will learn it from the end of the pasuk that adds, this is the nakedness of your father. So that means even after he dies. What's Rabbi Yehuda going to do with this pasuk? Because that's extra for him. Rabbi Yehuda says, from here I learn that, let's say someone sleeps with his father's wife while they are married, while his father is married to that woman. So how do I know that one is liable only to one count in that case? From here, that one is liable as a father's wife, but not as adultery, even though it's also adultery if they are currently married. But we only apply one. We only apply Ervat Avicha, only the prohibition of incest and not the prohibition of adultery. Hold on, is that really what Rabbi Yehuda thinks? V'anan tenan, in our Mishnah, there's no disagreement about this. Our Mishnah taught, Habal eshet av, chayav aleh mishum eshet av, umishum eshet ish. Ben bechaya abiv, ben lachar mitat abiv, vela palig Rabbi Yehuda. If someone has relations with his father's wife, one is liable for that prohibition of father's wife and also adultery, because if they are indeed married at that time. And it doesn't matter whether the father is alive or has died. Now, if the father died, we saw that then there's no adultery. They have to be currently married. But the point is that the first prohibition of father's wife applies both when the father is alive and after the father is dead. But Rabbi Yehuda has no disagreement here. It records a disagreement of Rabbi Yehuda in the previous paragraph, but not for this. So now why tell me that Rabbi Yehuda is going to learn from this pasuk, Ervat Avicha, that one is not liable for adultery when he sleeps with his father's wife while they are married. Amar Abaye, Palik Babaraita. Abaye says, although the Mishnah does not record Rabbi Yehuda disagreeing, Braita does record it. And so yes, in fact, Rabbi Yehuda, at least according to the Braita, in fact disagrees on this case also. Before we saw the warning, but now we want to know the derivation of the punishment for a father's wife after the father has died. Where do we get that from? Rabbi Yehuda could answer this simply because he has a gezerah shava. So once the channel is open, we can learn lots of things from it. But what's the source for the rabbis? And so the rabbis can say from that pasuk, Ervat Aviv Gila, which Rabbi Yehuda used for a gezerah shava, that was one of the phrases that was extra for him. So the Rabbi Yehuda used it for gezerah shava, but the rabbis can use that as the source for the punishment for sleeping with the father's wife even after the father died. And last question for Rabbanan, where do we know the punishment for incest with one's mother who is not the father's wife? We know the warning for that is from the simple reading of Vayikra 18, Ervat Imecha. But from where can we learn the punishment? Amar Rav Shisha bered Rav Idi. Amar Kera Imecha hi Asa'a Katub L'imo She'ena Eshet Abiv Kimo Shehi Eshet Abiv. So this is Rav Shisha, the son of Rav Idi. Do you remember yesterday? We said, we're going to see on the next daf a teaching about Imecha that everybody liked. Well, this is it. Okay, he says from the word imechahi, which are extra words, she is your mother. We know she's your mother. So the pasuk is equating a mother who is not his father's wife to be the same law as his mother who is his father's wife. Haba'al kalato, if someone has relations with his daughter-in-law. So that's also 2 counts. If they're married, that would be prohibition of incest of daughter-in-law, and also adultery if his son and his daughter-in-law are married. So now we ask, why not add another prohibition of the wife of his son? Well, why would you say that? Because look at the pasuk. It says, Ervat kalatecha lo tegale. Kalatecha, daughter-in-law. Okay, so that's one prohibition. Eshet bin chahi. Then it says, the wife of your son. So since this is a separate phrase in Hebrew, kala and eshet ben, so you have daughter-in-law and son's wife. So this is 2 separate phrases. Maybe that means this is 2 separate prohibitions besides adultery if they're married. So why don't we add another one over here? Amar Abaye, patacha katu bechalato v'siyem be'eshet beno. Lo malach, zo hi kalato, zo hi eshet beno. So Abaye says, no, this is not 2 separate prohibitions. Rather, the pasuk opens with the word kala, and then it continues with the phrase, the son's wife, to teach you that what is a kala? It's a son's wife. What's a son's wife? It's a kala. So it's just giving a definition of the word, but it's not adding another prohibition. Next Mishnah, Habal HaZachur ve'al HaBehema ve'Haisha mebi'at HaBehema biskila. If someone engages in homosexual intercourse as the active partner, or in bestiality as the active partner, or a woman who engages in bestiality as the passive partner, all of these people, including the animal in bestiality, gets sekila. And the Mishnah asks, Im Adam chata behema mechata. I understand the human being has free will and sinned, but the animal doesn't have free will. What kind of sin did it do? You're going to hold an animal responsible? Rather, because the person came to calamity because of the animal, so yes, the animal gets sekila. It's not that the animal is responsible for its actions or has free will, but because, whether it was willing or not, it happened to be the object that caused the person to stumble, and therefore therefore it is killed. Davar acher shelo tehe behema obedet bashuk v'yomeru zo hi sheniskal peloni al yada. Or another answer, that if we let this animal live, it's going to be walking in the marketplace, and someone will say, oh, that's the animal that person sinned with and got sikila. And people are going to start talking about that sin. And we don't want to add shame to this whole incident. We don't want people to be talking about it even more. So therefore, it's killed so that people won't be reminded that this is the animal that was involved in that sin. Zachar minalan. So how do we know that mishkab zachur is prohibited? De Tanura Banan, we learn a baraita that will elaborate on the pasuk. Ish perat lekatan. Well, it says a man, that it comes to exclude a minor. So therefore, the active partner, the penetrator, has to be an adult in order to get capital punishment. If the active partner is a child does not get punished. Asher yishkab et zachar ben gadol ben katan. However, the passive partner can be an adult or a child. Now, of course, if it's a child, the child will not get the punishment. But the point is that if an adult has homosexual relations with a child, the adult gets killed. We call that a sexual act, even though it's a child. And so you might say maybe the child is not yet developed or something like that. That's not true. So the adult will be killed in such a situation, but not the child. So the pasuk describing homosexual relations says, if a man lies with a man, as the lyings of a woman, as in plural, the ways in which one lies with a woman. Why is that in plural? So the Midrash says, this teaches us that there are two ways to have sexual relations with a woman, from the front and from the back. And this is that means that both of these acts are considered sexual acts, and that would have a lot of consequences. Like, for example, if someone committed adultery only with anal sex, that's still called a sexual act and still would be called adultery. And so we learn that from this plural here. Amar Rabbi Ishmael, Rabbi Ishmael points out an interesting thing here, that the words mishkebe isha, although they come to teach us something about mishkab zachur, we end up learning something about heterosexual sex as well. In other words, when the pasuk wants to define what is considered a homosexual act that would be punishable, so it says like one lies with a woman. The point of that is that it's talking about some kind of genital penetration. That's the act that is prohibited. So that's why he compares it to that. But since it uses a plural, we end up learning not only from heterosexual to homosexual sex, we also learn from this pasuk general definition about heterosexual sex, that both regular and anal sexual acts are considered a sexual act legally. So that, for example, if someone would commit adultery by anal sex, that would still be considered adultery and would be punishable. We might not necessarily know that without this pasuk, and so that's why this pasuk comes to teach and about mishkab zachur, but ends up we learn a general definition of what is considered a legal sexual act. Or illegal, but the point is that it's considered a sexual act and not something else. Mot yumetu biskila. So this prohibition, mishkav zachur, it says mot yumetu, they will die, biskila, and the punishment is sikila. Tamar biskila no ela be'achad mikol mitot amurat b'Torah. Is that true? Is sikila? Maybe it's a different form of a capital punishment. Ne'mar kan demehem ba, ne'mar be'ovi de'oni demehem ba. Malalan biskila, afkan biskila. We do a gezer hashava. It says here the words demehem ba, and regarding a necromancer and sorcerer also it says their blood be upon them. And so just like over there it's explicit, it says sikila. Here also it must be sikila. Onesh shamanu azra minayin. So far we have a source for the punishment, but what about a warning? Talmud Omar ve'et zachar lo tishka mishkebei isha to'eh bahi. Oh, so back to Vayikra 18 that lists the prohibitions but not the punishments. So here it says, and one shall not lie with a male as with a woman. We did quote this part of the pasuk mishkebei isha, but the point is that this is ve'et zachar lo tishka, we didn't quote yet. So this is the warning. Lamanu azhara lashocheb, azhara nishka minayin. So for this we only learn a warning to the active partner. What about the passive partner? Because it says lo tishkav, do not lie. So that's the active partner. Talmud lomar lo hiyeh kadesh mi bnei Israel ve'omer v'gam kadesh haya ba'aretz asu kechol to'ebot hagoyim asher horish ve'gomer debrei Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Ishmael learns it from the pasuk, there should not be a kaddish. Kaddish you can define as a male prostitute that would work in pagan temples and served males. And so these would, what did they do? Well, it doesn't say exactly what they did, but it's called kaddish because of that. They're not actually holy, but because they serve in these pagan temples, they are, quote unquote, as if they are doing a holy act in some pagan probably fertility ritual. Anyway, this was prohibited from having Bnei Israel. Now, what did they do? The pasuk in Melachim, although it's pasuk in Melachim, and we don't usually learn halacha from there, but we're not actually learning the halacha, but just a definition of what kadesh is. Well, they did all the abominations that were done by the other nations that were driven out, and that includes all kinds of acts like this. And therefore, we learn that not only an active partner, but also the recipient has a warning from Lo Yeh Kadesh. Rabbi Akiva Omer Eno Sarich Harehu Omer Ve'et Zachar Lo Tishkav Mishkevei Isha Karibeh Lo Tishacher. Rabbi Akiva says, no, I don't have to bring another pasuk. I can learn it from this pasuk itself, because Rabbi Akiva says I don't have to follow the regular vocalization that we receive, but I can revocalize it also, not instead, but in addition. So pasuk says Vetzachah lo tishkab. That's an active verb, so that's the warning for the active partner. But I can read it lo tishachev. Remember, there's no nikudot in the Sefer Torah, so since it can be read that way, do not be lain with. So that's an azhara for the recipient. Behema minalan. Where's the source that bestiality is not allowed? Tetanur banan. Ish perat katan. Asher yiten shechobto b'behema. Ben gedola ben ketana. So it says a man, one is only liable to bestiality as an adult, but a child is never punished for their actions. Who gives his seed into an animal. So animal means any animal, whether the animal is old or young. That makes no difference how old the recipient is. Mot yumat biskila, and the punishment is sikila. Ta'omer biskila o eno ela b'achad mikol mitot amonot b'Torah. How do you know it's sikila? Maybe it's a different punishment. Ne'emar kan taharogu, v'ne'emar lahalan ki harog tahargenu. Ma lehalan biskila, afkan biskila. Because here it doesn't say the mehembam, so we can't use that. Rather, it says here taharogu, you shall kill, and it does say regarding an inciter to idolatry, you shall surely kill him, with the same verb. So just like over there, it does say sikila. So over here, we learn that this is sikila as well. Lamanu onesh lach shocheb, onesh lanishkab minalan. So from here we will learn punishment for someone who commits bestiality as a man and as an active role. But what about someone who commits bestiality in a passive role? Talmud lomar kol shocheb im behema mot yumat im eno inyan la-shocheb teno inyan la-nishkab. We're going to learn it from this pasuk that says anyone who lies with an animal shall be put to death. Well, we already know that from another pasuk. So this is an extra pasuk. So we use the midrashic methodology. If it's not teaching us something about what it says, when meaning an active role, then it must be talking about something else. And so that's how we apply it to someone committing bestiality, even though they are the recipient. So that from here we know the punishment for both the active and passive roles in bestiality. But what about the warning? Well, it says, and any animal thou shalt not lie and defile yourself with it. So that's in Vayikra 18 again, where we learn most of these warnings. But from here, it just says lo titen, don't give your seed. So that's the active partner. What about if someone is receiving from the animal? How do we know that that is prohibited? Where's the warning? Ishmael learns from the same pasuk that these Kadesh people, they would do all kinds of sins, abominations that other pagan nations would do, and they did all kinds of things, including bestiality as active and as passive recipients, and so that's prohibited in Israel. So that's the warning. Rabbi Akiva Omer eno sarich Harei Omer lo titen shechobtecha lo titen Rabbi Akiva again says, I don't have to go to another pasuk. I can learn it from this pasuk itself. It says, don't give your seed. That's how we pronounce it. But you can also reread it as shechi batecha. Do not enable your being lain with. So also, you have to be careful not to be lain with from an animal. And that's how we learn the warning also against being a recipient. Habala zachor vebi alav zachar. And now we have a question, and this machloked that that we just saw will have a different answer depending on which view we follow. What if someone does two acts in one bishogeg, in one period of not realizing? He is the active partner in Mishkav Zachur, and he is the passive recipient in Mishkav Zachur, and he forgot or doesn't know about this prohibition, and so it's a asur bishogeg. And the question is, how many sin offerings will he have to bring? One or two? He did two acts, but it's within one time lapse of not knowing. So that's the question. Amar Abhu the Dibrei Bishmael chayav shetayim chada milot tishkab vechada milo yeh kadesh. Rabbi Abhu says, well, it depends. If you follow Bishmael, even though it's within one time lapse, and usually if you do two of the same sin within one time lapse, and it's only one korban chatat, like on Shabbat, if you cook two different things within the same time lapse of not realizing it's Shabbat, so it's only one korban chatat. That is the general rule. But here, according to the Bishmael, it's actually, he learns it from two different pesukim. And so, since it's two different pesukim, it's two different prohibitions. And therefore, he has to bring two korban chatats, one for being active and one for being passive. Whereas, according to the Akiba, he only has to bring one korban because he learns it from the same pasuk, and therefore, being an active or passive partner is all the same prohibition, and violating the same prohibition twice within one time lapse of not realizing it's prohibited only brings one chatat. Haba al habehema vehebi behema alav. Similar question regarding bestiality. If someone's an active partner and commits bestiality, and then as the passive partner within one time lapse of not realizing that's prohibited. Amar Rabbi Abhu l'Dibrei Bishmael chayav shetayim chada milo titen shechoptecha vechada milo yeh kadesh. L'Dibrei Rabbi Akiva eno chayav el achat shechoptecha ushchibatecha chada hi. According to Bishmael, since he learns from two different pesukim, that's two different prohibitions, so we'll have to bring two korbanot. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's from one pasuk. Even though we're vocalizing it in two different ways, still it's the same exact word, and therefore they are both two aspects of one prohibition. And so since he did two acts, but they're both the same prohibition within one time lapse, he only has to bring one korban. Abaye amar, afilu dibrei Rabbi Yishmael name eno chayav el achat kedechi ketiv lo yekadesh begabre ketiv. Abaye argues with Rabbi Abhu, and he says, even according to Rabbi Ishmael, if someone engages in bestiality as the active partner and then as the passive partner within one lapse of not realizing that it's prohibited, even according to Rabbi Ishmael, he's only liable to one one sacrifice, because the pasuk lo yeh kadesh is talking about intercourse with a human being. That only applies to mishkav zachur. It does not apply to a bestiality. That apparently was not the job of the kadesh and was not done in these pagan temples even. So therefore, that pasuk does not apply. Well, if that pasuk does not apply to bestiality, then we ask, Ela Rabbi Ishmael azarad l'nishkab minaleh. According to Abaye, where does he have a warning for someone who's the passive partner in bestiality? He's going to learn it from the pasuk that we quoted for the punishment. Over there we said, Kol shecheb behema, anyone who's active partner with an animal will die. That's the punishment. But we already had a pasuk that taught us the punishment. So we saw already. If you're not going to apply it to the active partner, so apply it to the passive partner. Then that's what we said regarding the punishment. Still, what about the warning? So now, why say it in such a funny way? If you mean the passive partner, why say the active partner? Why say shochev in this pasuk also? If you already had another pasuk, right? So why does the pasuk say both of them in active regarding the punishment? If we're just going to have to take one and say it's extra and flip it to the passive, the reason is mashocheb anash v'yizhir af nishkab anash v'yizhir, in order to teach us that just like we do have an explicit warning regarding being the active partner, so too that warning will apply to the passive partner as well. So this pasuk that says active, even though it means passive, is meant to be a link between active and passive, and thereby through that link we can say the warning for active applies also to passive. But the point is that we're learning it from the same pasuk, and therefore Abaye says even if Ishmael would agree that someone who is the active and passive partner in bestiality within one time lapse only brings one korban, because because it's only one pasuk. Now, a new case, if someone is the passive participant in Mishkab Zachur and then the passive participant in bestiality, all within one time lapse, so how many sacrifices does he have to bring? So the Abu says, according to the Akiba, he has to bring two because these are two separate prohibitions. One we learn from Lo Tishkab, that's Mishkab Zachur, and the other we learn from do not give your seed, and in both of these he learns as active and passive, and so they're both passive, but they're learned from two different Pesukim, and therefore two sin offerings. However, according to the Bishmael, one only has to bring one sin offering because we learn both of these from Lo Yeh Kadesh. This is according to the Biabu, where he learns the passive for Mishkab Zachur and the passive partner in bestiality from Lo Yeh Kadesh. Since he's learning it from one pasuk, it's only one prohibition, so he brings one sacrifice. But Abaye will disagree with the Biabu here also. Abaye Amar afilu dibre Bishmael nameh chayab shetayim dichtiv kol shocheb im behema mot yumat. אם אינו עניין השוכב, תנו עניין לנשכב, והפקד החמד על נשכב בלשון שוכב, מה שוכב אנש והזהיר, אף נשכב אנש והזהיר. Abaye says that this pasuk of Lo Yeh Kadesh is only applying to homosexual acts, but not bestiality. And therefore, he says, even according to the Bishmael, since this person did two acts, one as passively as Mishkav Zachur, and one passively as he committed bestiality, this is from two different places. The one from Mishkav Zachur, indeed, we learned from Lo Yeh Kadesh. But the prohibition for being the passive partner of bestiality, we learn from this pasuk that says anyone who lies with an animal, mot yumat, and it says it active, but we don't need another pasuk for active. So since it doesn't apply to that context, so we apply it to the passive one. Now that's all for the punishment, but since it says the punishment in twice as an act in an active with an active verb, so we say, oh, therefore it's linking active with passive, and therefore the warning that we had for active applies also to the to passive. Anyway, the point is that this is two different sources, two different Pesukim. One for being the passive partner in Mishkab Zachur is Lo Yeh Kadesh, and one for being the passive partner in bestiality, which is the same pasuk as being active partner, but it's a different pasuk from Lo Yeh Kadesh. And therefore, Abaye says the Bishmael would agree that he requires two sin offerings. Aval haba ala zachur vehebi zachad alav haba ala behema vehebi behema alav. Now, someone did four prohibited acts all in one time lapse. First, he was the active partner in Mishkab Zachur, then the passive partner in Mishkab Zachur, then the active partner in bestiality, and then the passive partner in bestiality. So now how many sin offerings does he have to give? Ben l'Rabbi Abu, ben l'Abaye, l'Rabbi Ishmael, chayav shalosh, l'Rabbi Akiba, chayav shetayim. So it doesn't matter whether you follow Rabbi Abu or Abaye. According to Rabbi Ishmael, you'll have to bring three. How so? Well, altogether, we've only been dealing with three Pesukim. So according to Rabbi Abu, the two passive acts will be learned from Lo Yeh Kadesh, and then the active Mishkav Zachur from that Pasuk, and the active role in bestiality will be learned from the pasuk regarding bestiality. According to Abaye, the active Mishkav Zachur is one pasuk, the passive Mishkav Zachur is from Lo Yeh Kadesh, and the active and passive bestiality are all from the same pasuk. But one way or another, there are three different pasukim here and three different prohibitions. Whereas, according to Rabbi Akiba, he only used two pasukim. He never used Lo Yeh Kadesh. He didn't need that at all. Rather, he reads the Mishkav Zachur pasuk both in active and passive, so that's one, and the bestiality pasuk in both active and passive, and so that's the other prohibition, and therefore the Rabbi Akiva only requires two. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.